Hello and welcome into the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are back continuing our positional previews. I have got another stellar guest as we dive into the running back position. I am joined by one of the nicest guys in the industry, one of the smartest minds. It is Dave Wright, as you probably know him, FF_Spaceman. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing great. I'm really excited to be on the Sanctuary. This is some of my favorite people are producing content here. I'm really excited for you guys, and always a great time to be talking running backs with you. I feel like we do this every year. Is this our third year doing this?
Third year in a row, yeah. So yeah, very very pleased you've taken the time out to jump back on with us. For those of you who don't know, so Dave, he's a writer over at DLF Football. He hosts the Tale of Two Rivals podcast. He is also a very important man behind the scenes in terms of the Scott Fishbowl Podathon as well. So if you're not following him, make sure you're giving him a follow over on Twitter. Dave, before we dive in and start talking about these players, it was a suggestion you had that would be great to kind of talk through your process, what you're looking for, how you're assessing these kind of rookie running backs as we're looking forward to their potential dynasty value. So is there specific things you're looking at? How do you kind of attack this time of year?
So my goal is, I know a lot of people have different goals. Is a running back good or not? Or is they want to use a model, and you think, I'm the numbers guy, I have a ton of spreadsheets, and I'm going to have this really fun model. And that's actually not my game. I've spent a lot of time trying to model running backs, wide receivers, and I'm just not happy with the way that it's come out, like to a high standard of just as far as a data analysis concerned. So I've kind of just been my players together, sort them out and categorize them on how I think they're going to play in the NFL and how they played in college. So essentially I'm trying to evaluate a range of potential fantasy football outcomes for each player using different archetypal type roles and workloads for the NFL. So if they're going to be a bell cow, a 2-down grinder, a committee back, 3-down or a 3rd-down specialist, or like a backup or part of a committee. That's how I'm trying to look at these roles that they could fall into and how they would fare in each one of those. And then based on that and their draft capital, eventually it'll be how I have them ranked and how good they're going to be in the NFL. So it's a little bit different type than a lot of other people who are just like, hey, I think this player is good, they're going to score lots of fantasy points. I think the running back position is a little bit different. It's more about there's a lot more given opportunity. Yeah, good players earn more opportunity, but the running back is a little bit weirder than wide receiver in other positions. So I think it's more about, hey, what happens when an injury in a backfield happens and they get a larger role? Can they outperform expectations? And that's what I'm kind of looking at, is how they perform in different roles. And I think it's a little unique for some people, but that's how I really approach it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of looking at it. I think it's like, I like the way you say that it's kind of almost a volume-based position. It's something that I try and preach, and that, wide receiver and tight end, less so tight end, but wide receiver is so much more talent-driven and less about situation, because a running back, a backup running back, a third-string running back, if there's 2 injuries ahead of them, you can almost bank in that volume, can't you? More than you can at any other position, except maybe quarterback. And I think it's a really interesting way, as you said, of sort of trying to pigeonhole them into buckets to try and decide what kind of archetype they could have at the next level.
And just to be a little bit more specific, I do looking at volume, rushing, receiving, and touchdown volume, their size and athleticism, and then also their efficiency. So that's kind of how I approach it, through those 3 lenses. And I weight them differently too.
That's interesting. So for me, I try and get through all the film initially. I try and watch at least 3 games of every player. I aim for 6, but a minimum of 3. And then I have my rookie model, which I'm sure we'll talk on in a bit as we're talking about the players. But there's a few key metrics that I'm chucking into there. But Dave, we can talk about process all along. I'd like to think that there's one player that across any process, however you're looking at it, I've certainly yet to talk to anybody that doesn't have him anywhere other than top 3, top 4 prospect of the last 5-10 years. Bijan Robinson, he's the running back 1 in ADP. He's the 101 in ADP across any format. What do you make? Is there anything particularly you love? What kind of prospect is he for you?
I honestly thought you were talking about Sean Tucker to start with, the way you introduced him. No, Bijan, he is It's nice when you hear about a player for a long time. He's been a Debbie darling since day one, and he hasn't disappointed. There was no major injury. There was no volume concerns. There was no size or athleticism concerns. It's just nice to just have something. It feels like pure. And what's great about him is that like I was saying, his volume over 20 rush attempts per game over his final 2 seasons, or he averaged them, I should say. Like, that's anyway, how I broke it down. He's got the touchdowns, he's got the receiving ability, and he's got the speed. He's got the size at 215 pounds, 4'4", 640, which translates to a really good speeds or weight adjusted speed score. And there were some whispers about that long speed. They were like, oh, I don't know if he has that top speed, and he silenced all the doubters. And I don't really know what to complain about with him. I think he's efficient, like top 10 in breakaway runs, top 3 in breaking tackles the last 2 seasons. He has like an efficient, like CMC Saquon level efficiency in college. I don't know where we can poke holes in this profile, which is just nice. And I actually haven't heard a lot of people talk about him because it's tough to poke holes. So you don't hear a lot of chatter on him, but man, I'd love to hear any other things that you've seen that I haven't seen, from what's your opinion? Because I've seen your rookie guy, but I'd love to talk to you about, this is when we get to talk about it in person.
Yeah. I mean, it's boring. It's boring content to just sit here and say, oh, he's fantastic, isn't he? But he really is. I mean, so much hype coming out of high school, 5-star recruit, steps on the field and produces straight away. I mean, you can see on the screen there, over 6 yards after contact per attempt as a true freshman is mind-blowing. I think that he's the rare, true 3-down back. And what I mean is that he's not a running back that can be used in the passing game. He's a player that I think if you took him as a slot receiver, would be a day 2 wide receiver. I think he's that good as a guy that you can line up all over the field and not just hand the ball to in the backfield. I think he's competent enough in the receiving game. I think he's a good enough route runner. I think he's got natural hands. So yeah, he is a complete back. He's not the level of, I've heard a lot of talk over the past couple of years, past year, that he's a Saquon level prospect. And I think in terms of the potential, the kind of ticks every box, yes, he's not a Saquon level athlete. And I think that's probably where you were talking about, there's some concerns about the top end speed. And I don't think he is a mind blowing, jump out the gym, run out the track kind of athlete. I think he's a very good NFL athlete, but I think that's the difference between Saquon Barkley, who is arguably one of the most athletic players in the league, obviously pre-ACL injury, and Bijan Robinson, who's a very good athlete. And look, we talked about my rookie model, 97th percentile pre-draft model. He's 99th percentile with a projected first-round draft capital, which would put him the second highest prospect in the model since 2012. So the only prospect that's higher than him in the model is Saquon Barkley. I think there's so few question marks. There's so few concerns. I think there's no such thing as a sure thing when it comes to fantasy. Absolutely. But it feels like he's about as close as you can get, because I don't have basically any question marks, any concerns over him at all.
I kind of love how we keep going back to Saquon Barkley, and I agree he is not the Saquon level athlete, but he's a better runner, I think, a natural runner than Saquon. Saquon had a lot of criticism that he was like a boom bust. He was like stopped a lot in the backfield, and then bounced a lot outside. I think Bijan's a little bit better of a pure runner, more of a pure football player, and I'm excited to see that pay off here. And while I do think certain landing spots are going to affect him, I already have him as my RB1 in Dynasty, but he's a top 2. He's in a tier with just, and this might be a shock, Breece Hall is my only other player in the tier. I think he's that already going into the NFL without knowing landing spot. He's that good.
Yeah, no, he's in the exact same for me. He's my RB1 in a tier with Breece Hall, so I completely agree there. And I think I agree with you. I think his vision is what sets him apart from a player like Saquon Barkley as well. I think that his ability to, not just hit the hole, but he can read the defenses and set up the blocks, and has shown patience. He's not just a case of, right, I'm going there, that's where I've got to hit. He's able to, use a change of pace. He's got a really nice, almost like, I like it, like a basketball player. I hate doing cross sport references, but like a basketball player where you talk about a point guard who's got the hesitation dribble, where it's like they'll slow things down, they'll get a defender on their hip and just wait for kind of the defense to move, and then they'll pounce. It's not Le'Veon Bell, and it feels like whenever you talk about a running back being patient, you have to talk about Le'Veon Bell, and it's not that type of essentially come to a stop behind the line of scrimmage, but he does use his adjustment in pace really well to make sure that the offensive line are in the best positions to create the best hole for him as such.
And going back to his receiving ability, I don't watch a lot of film, and most of the stuff I see is just highlights, and which is terrible. I know, oh my gosh, I don't want to get hexed off the show here from your listeners here, but when I see some of the highlights of what he can do catching the ball too, it does look like a receiver, which is exciting to see, because sometimes you see, a couple of crazy over the head catches from running backs or some contested catches. But no, it looks, I'm not saying he's that like a receiver level. He just looks like a natural pass catcher, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think he's a day 2 wide receiver if he comes out as a pure slot receiver. So we'll stop hyping up Bijan. I feel like there's only so much you can talk about how incredible a guy is. We're going to move on to the consensus running back 2 in the draft. Jahmyr Gibbs. I've heard a lot of talk, and people suggest that in any other year he'd be in that kind of RB1. He's better than several of the running backs that have gone RB1 over the last couple of years. Are you one of those people that believe he's a truly elite prospect, or do you think he's in that kind of second tier?
I'm not sure if he's even in that second tier for me as far as other prospects, which might be a little blasphemous, I guess I could say. But that being said, historically, I have faded type of the Jahmyr Gibbs type players that don't have a lot of rushing volume, that are efficient catching the ball. I just faded them more often than not, because I'm more going for I'd rather go for the Jonathan Taylors or the Breece Halls, the more dependable volume, because I think volume ultimately to wins. But that being said, Jahmyr Gibbs has broken the mold for me, and he is my RB2 because of just how talented of a receiver he is. And like when I talk about the volume wise, he averaged 12.4 rush attempts per game in college. And that for me is just, I usually don't even like look at players under 15 rush attempts in the first round. Like, just as I think you have to show some kind of ability to handle a volume at the running back position. And even if you look at percentage of the offense, it still doesn't match up to other historical successful RBs in fantasy. But then when you go to and you look at the receiving ability, it's over 100 receptions over his 3 years. That's filthy from the running back position. That is filthy, and he's efficient when he catches the ball. So it's not like catches dump offs all the time. I'm not saying like I can't see how he does out of the slot or how he looks catching the ball in my spreadsheets, but it's nice to see that he's getting chunk plays catching the ball. He's not just taking dump offs constantly, which happens with some running backs. They'll just accrue some catches, but he's actually taking the ball and gaining yards after that, which is special to see for me. And he's not creating a ton of missed tackles. 25% juke rate is maybe a little above average, but he's got a really good big run rate when he does carry the ball. And he's just really efficient. So for me, he kind of projects as what I call like a weapon RB, which is something that I usually don't like to go to, because I want my running, because the way I approach fantasy is I want to have my 1 or 2 running backs I really depend on, and they depend on them for volume. But in this case with Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he's going to have kind of like what Christian McCaffrey was as a rookie. I'm not sure if you remember back in 2017, but he got like 7 to 8 rush attempts a game and 7 targets a game, and he finishes the RB8 overall in the season. I'm not saying that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to finish the RB8, but I think that's the kind of workload that we're going to expect to see. A high value touch type player, where in pivotal third downs in the red zone, the green zone, he's going to be getting these high valuable touches that really translate well for fantasy. And that's why I'm willing to overlook the volume concerns. And especially in PPR, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a special player because that's what he is. And I think there's a lot to talk about here. I could talk about him for 20 minutes because he really is such a complex player. And the reason why he's different for me is usually when you look at players who don't get a lot of volume in college, rushing volume, and then you look at, and then they were good receivers. They're not that athletic. They're max in speed. They're usually like running the 4.6s, the 4.7s, or they have like really good agility, but not top end speed. And they're smaller. So that's why you don't see them get a lot of volume. But you've got the elite speed of Gibbs, which at 199 pounds or whatever it was, I think it was like a 4.36, I think, if my memory is running at the combine. And that's what separates him from the, just being a third down back or whatever have you. He's got the juice to really turn and give you value as a fantasy player in those high value situations.
Yeah, I really like Gibbs. I don't get on board with the, he's an elite prospect. I think he's definitely that kind of tier below. When I first dove into him, it's, the receiving ability pops off a page. I mean, that rookie number, he had a 30% targets per route run rate as a rookie, as a true freshman, sorry. Like, that's mind blowing. I mean, that's Devontae Adams was at 30% in the NFL this last year. Like, that's how often the ball was going to him as a true freshman in the receiving game. It's mad. I think there are some concerns about his vision. I think he will definitely be a 1A, 1B type back at the NFL. I don't think he's going to be the kind of guy that's going to carry the ball, as you said, huge amounts, particularly in those kind of goal-to-goal situations. You see, that's probably the one flaw for him in terms of my rookie model. He's a 12th percentile best market share touchdown guy. Like, he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, and it is a concern.
Touchdowns is key right there. Yep, I agree 100% about touchdowns is a concern.
Yeah, and that's a worry, is that this is a guy that, could be, his ceiling is Austin Eckler without the goal line usage, basically. And, part of the reason Austin Eckler has been so incredible for fantasy the last couple of years is that he's, 18 and 20 touchdowns in the last couple of years. It's, those touchdowns are what has put Austin Eckler over the top, because he doesn't see the rushing volume. And that is definitely a concern. I really like him. I think he's a good prospect, but he's not a home run, because I think there are definitely some flaws in terms of what he could be at the next level.
And honestly, I think maybe Austin Eckler's a good maybe NFL type comp, but what his production profile, it doesn't look like Austin Eckler's. Like, Austin Eckler was carrying the load. He was scoring over 15 touchdowns a season. That's just not what Gibbs did. So I don't normally do this, but I was trying to think of some comps for Gibbs, and it was maybe you had to do a Franken comp because he is so unique.
Yeah,
his speed and his receiving ability makes him so unique. So I was like, maybe he's a smaller, faster DeAndre Swift, but better receiver than DeAndre Swift, I think. Or like, that's kind of what I was trying to think. Or maybe, or like, not as exciting Reggie Bush, like that. Like, that's like what I can, like, he doesn't,
I don't think,
wow you like Reggie Bush.
I mean, like, he's not got the thing. Reggie Bush is that next level agility, isn't it? Yeah, and I just, as much as Jahmyr Gibbs has got that top end speed, I think he's good. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I'd be intrigued to see what his like 3-cone time is and stuff. I think he's a good agile player, but I don't think he's mind-blowingly agile that he's, Reggie Bush level. I agree with you. I don't like comps. I don't tend to do comps because I think it can narrow people's minds too much. I think when they're done right, they're fantastic, but I think they can be done poorly. But I just don't see a world in which we're like, yeah, there's this Jahmyr Gibbs is this person 2.0, because as you said, there's not an easy comparison.
Well said. And going back a little bit, when you said Austin Eckler, but without the goal line stuff, he reminds me of early Austin Eckler when he first started to play in the NFL. That's kind of what I envisioned his role to be when he was sharing the ball with Melvin Gordon.
Exactly.
That's, I think, as a high end upside for him.
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of, I feel like his role is going to be like DeAndre Swift had last year with the Lions, splitting work with Jamal Williams if DeAndre Swift had been healthy all year and not carrying sort of nagging injuries.
I should have told you that's a trigger for me to talk about DeAndre Swift's workload.
It was the only reason I wanted to bring it up. But whilst you're here, guys, make sure you're giving us a like below, hit that thumbs up button, but also make sure you're subscribing. We've got plenty more content coming over the next few weeks as we get into rookie season, but also post-rookie draft. It's going to be all about best ball. We're going to have plenty flying your way. Diving into the running back 3 in this class.
No, we're not diving in. I want to say, I want to put a rubber stamp on that because I subscribe, I listen, I watch, and I have a ton of respect for your guys' content. So I just want to make sure that and I don't just throw that around everywhere. Ton of respect for you guys and what you're doing. So really excited to be on here and just partake in what you guys are doing, because I know you guys had a ton of success early. It's because of the quality of people, the quality of analysis, and just the work that you guys are putting into it. So I just want to throw that in on the sanctuary before we get going.
Well, I genuinely appreciate that more than you could ever believe, Dave. I don't really know how to segue from that back into Zach Charbonnet, so I'm just we're gonna dive straight back in. So the RB3 in the class, I've seen some people really hate on him. I've seen some people completely obsessed with him and suggest that he should be higher in ranks. Are you a Charbonnet believer or not?
So before I dove in, I thought to myself, I'm not really interested in Zach. Is it Charbonnet? So that's good to know. That's how you pronounce it. So
that's how I'm pronounced. Don't quote me. I don't get to watch college football live, so all of my tape study is done with the sound off. So I'm definitely not the right person to ask for pronunciations.
So Charbonnet is how. So I wanted to, I saw, I just know a little bit about him from what you hear, what you pick up, but I've been really trying not to listen to the rookies until I look into it. And I just actually looked into all the running backs this week. And for me, initially without looking at the stats, I thought I want to put him over Jahmyr Gibbs because of what we talked about with Gibbs is he doesn't have the volume, the guaranteed volume that I love to have when I'm investing, when you're investing an early rookie pick, you really want to see that volume and get that initial return. And Charbonnet, he'll get that. And then I looked at it, and first off, I became to appreciate Jahmyr Gibbs, and then Charbonnet, I don't know. Charbonnet, he just kind of left me wanting a little more. I could have, if he had a little more volume, I would have per game, I would have loved it. Now, solid per game stuff of, average 18 rush attempts per game over his final 2 seasons. I think 20 is an arbitrary number that I like. If I see anything over 20, I'm like, oh yeah, that rubber stamp it, good to go. Topped out at 40% rushing attempt market share, which for me is, it's okay. You'll see plenty of successful RB1s in the NFL who had that in college, but man, when you get to 45, 50, 55%, you can have a lot more confidence. And then, 24 and 37 recs over the last 2 seasons. And that's not terrible. That's not terrible, but 0 receiving touchdowns on those receptions. But he did have 3 double-digit rushing touchdown seasons as well. So it's a mixed bag, but overall, I left thinking, yeah, not amazing by any means as far as raw production, but it's complete, more complete than Gibbs and a lot more complete than other running backs we're going to talk about today. So that's kind of how I left his volume. Then his size, 4'5'3" at 214 pounds. That is totally acceptable. Boom, check. It's not elite by any means. His speed, his size, not elite. He's not going to be Derrick Henry or what have you, but meets the requirements to succeed in the NFL. And efficiency, I was actually a little bit more surprised. I was looking at his stats. I was like, it doesn't feel very efficient, but pretty decent juke rate over his final season at 27% and 34% as a junior juke rate, which is evaded tackle or missed tackles per touch, and then 15.2% big run rate, which is actually better than Bijan's big run rate and as a junior, and then 22% as a senior was just impressive. So he actually had a little bit more juice, more playmaking ability per PFF stats than I was originally thinking looking at his profile. And then I had to remind myself, okay, it's in the Pac-12, so maybe not as high level competition. Now I don't have my East Coast bias to play into it too much, but 7.2 yards per touch as a senior is solid efficiency type number. So overall, I think above average efficiency, pretty decent volume, and he checks off my size and athleticism. So I was like, yeah, RB3 seems totally appropriate for me in this, and that's where he kind of fell.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to be seen as a hater. There's a lot to like. I think he ticks a lot of boxes. I think he's good at a number of things. He feels like a ham and egger. Like he's just not great. And I don't know, outside of his vision, which I think is phenomenal, and I think that his vision will translate to the next level, and I think that's a really good skill. But I just don't know if he's ever going to be anything more than kind of replacement level running back. And that's just not a guy that, for me, from fantasy, from a dynasty perspective, that I'm excited to go and draft. I'd rather take a risk and hope that it kind of pays out. I think from a receiving profile perspective, I think there's three kind of different types of running back when it comes to receiving. There's guys that can flex out wide, run good routes, and natural receivers. There's guys that can catch checkdowns and screens and kind of, as you said earlier, kind of compile receiving stats without actually being a good receiver. And then there's guys that basically can't run routes and can't catch. And he's kind of halfway between those latter two there. I think he doesn't look good running routes. I don't think he's a natural hands catcher, but he did all right. But a lot of it is, you look at his ADOT, you look at where he's been lined up. It's a lot of checkdowns. It's a lot of behind line scrimmage screen passes. There's not much there in terms of juice in that aspect of the game. And that's where I kind of knock him slightly. He's the kind of guy that I'd be absolutely delighted taking at the back end of the first or an early second round pick in Superflex drafts. But I know that because of the running back positional value, he's probably never going to fall to me there. And I'm probably going to end up with very few shares.
See, and going back a little bit, because I think sometimes running backs get knocked because, they're not like great. They're not going to go out and run routes. 80%, I feel like, of running back targets are within a line of the line of scrimmage anyway. If you look at how it like in the NFL and how running back targets are spread, 80%ish are dump off / just early screens. There's not a lot of running backs going out there and catching 10-yard, 10-yard sideline type catches. That just doesn't really, that's Christian. Yeah, that's Christian McCaffrey can go out and do that. And Austin Eckler to a certain extent, but you're not going to be getting a ton of that. So that's why I don't necessarily concern myself with the route running and that as much. Now it is indicative because it does allow you to get better yak ability, more, efficiency when you're running good crisp routes and you get more into the open field. And that's where some real big plays can happen. So I don't want to minimize it either, but I think he's shown production wise that he has the capability where I don't think he's going to keep a good pass catcher off the field in the NFL, but it's not like he's going to be taken off the field because he's a minus either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like he could end up in a 1A, 1B role, but it's not going to be right, Charbonnet's your first two downs. He comes off the field. We put a true traditional third down back on in those pass catching situations. It could be a 60-40 split, and he's getting a mix of first down carries, goal line carries, third down work. He can do it all. I think, and I just don't know how much of it he's kind of going to be elite at, if that makes sense.
And Rat put a bow on this. I also have him like right here to wrap it up. Profiles is a 1A back in the committee for me. When I think he could, if something broke perfectly right for him, maybe he could have a mid RB1 type season. But I'm talking like perfect scenario, which is unrealistic type ceiling. But overall, when his career is said and done, and he has things break right, he doesn't have too much competition in his backfield. I could see him having 1 to 2 low end RB1 seasons in his resume, which you look at the list and you're like, oh, he had an RB1 type season for certain players in there. And that's kind of what I think you're going to get from Charbonnet. And it's not to be dismissive at all, but I'm not going to go into my rookie draft, come away with Zach Charbonnet and be like, oh yes, I nailed the first round of my rookie draft. That's just not going to feel. Now he's going to be useful. He's going to be important to my fantasy. And the thing is, no one felt that about Ramondre Stevenson. No one's felt that about a lot of different backs. And then they come in and they get the volume and they produce. I think that's what we're looking at here. If he's gets an opportunity to get the volume, I think will produce. Now he's not going to be uber efficient and light the world on fire, but he can be important to your fantasy team in that way.
Yeah, 100%. Diving over to someone that's got a little bit more juice, a little bit more exciting in my eyes, Devon Achane. RB4 and ADP. Dave, are you a believer, or are you concerned about the size?
So I guess I'm on the fence. You want to call it that way? I'm on the fence. I'm a hater of small running backs. I just don't like to invest in them. I'm a traditionalist. I love my backs over 210 pounds. 205 is usually my minimum. And then we see him coming in at 188 pounds of the combine. And it was disappointing to me. I was disappointed because a lot of people I respect are talking up about just how electric and just special Achane is. And all that being said, and how like I'm on the fence, is he ends up as my RB4 in this class, which is I think more of an indictment on the class. But it actually says something to that also, as a hater for this type of archetype, to put him that high for me says something about just he does have some of that special part to him that people are excited about. And he, you see this from a lot of these small running backs. They do have that one season in college where they had a decent amount of volume. Same thing with Achane. He had 19.6 rush attempts per game in his final season. And that was good for 53.5% of his team's rushing share, which is top 5 in this class. So that's pretty good as well. And then 24 and 36 receptions over his 24 and 36 receptions over his final 2 seasons. So I'm starting to, my prejudice, my bias is starting to be overcome here because, I love receiving. He's got some volume. So I'm starting to trying to make it work. And then, 9 or 8 rushing touchdowns, which is good for at 60% of the Texas A&M's rushing offense or rushing touchdown production. That's also another checkbox. So in the context of his team, he could score touchdowns. And then, he's 4.32 speed at 108 pounds, which is good for a 108 weight adjusted speed score, which is, so when you adjust for that small size, he's still fast, which would make sense at 4.32. And I'm just sitting here left, and it's puzzling. And it's puzzling because what does this mean for fantasy? Because he has a really good 17% big run rate in his final season and a 27% juke rate. So 27% juke rate is nothing special at all. It's maybe above average or average. So basically, and from what I've heard is that he's more of a north-south type guy. He's not really a side-to-side make you miss type of player. So he's basically there for the big plays. And in fantasy, where I'm going to target him, it's got to be in the second round. I'm not taking a risk on him in the first round. Even a lot of these these secondary, second tier and third tier quarterbacks, I'd probably take the risk on them over him. Definitely the running backs we've already talked about. So I think I'm just neutral on him, but for me, neutral on a player of this size is actually a positive for him because he had to impress me to get to this level, because usually I would just let other people draft him and then worry about, what is he going to do on maybe he'll top out at 12 touches per game once or twice in his career. Maybe because just you don't see it anymore. So that's kind of where I am on him. And what does that mean? That's so I'm hoping for a flex type play. I don't want a flex type player at the end of my first round in dynasty drafts, super flex drafts. So maybe if I have a stud RB, I'm loaded everywhere else, tight end, QB, and I just want that maybe a high volatile RB2, that's where he kind of sets into my roster building construction wise. But otherwise, I'm definitely not going in and targeting Achane anywhere. It's more like when all the other players are gone and the way my board falls, I'll select him at some point in the second round. So better than I would think, but probably a hater by some people's standards.
Definitely a hater by my standards, I reckon, Dave. So I really like him. I really like him. I think that, look, we can talk about size concerns. I'm not a believer, shall we say, in that size necessarily dictates a huge amount as you are. I think that this is a guy that was able to carry the rock, as you said, over 19 times a game in the SEC against some impressive defenses. He put up decent stats. I don't think he's going to be a, 15, 20 carry a game guy, but I think that he's got the explosiveness and that top end speed that he could be fantasy, relevant on 7, 8, 10 touches a game. Plus he's got the receiving usage that I think teams are going to want to get the ball in his hands in space and let him go. As you said, he's not an elite agile athlete. I think he's definitely faster than quick, if that makes sense. I think he is top end speed, north-south runner. I think he's got good vision. I think he's I'd be shocked if he's asked to carry the ball between the tackles more than a couple of times a game, just because I think he's not got, that's where the size concern definitely comes in. But, we talked about raw numbers. You look at his touchdown stats, they look similar to Jahmyr Gibbs. The difference is that Jahmyr Gibbs was, as I said, 13th percentile best market share touchdown percentage. Devon Achane's 80th percentile best market share touchdown percentage because, he didn't score huge amounts of rushing touchdowns, but neither did Texas A&M, quite frankly. So I think he ticks a lot of boxes for me. I would always rather, if I'm going to take a punt on a running back, I would always, outside of, the elite options as we're getting into that beginning of the second round and beyond, I'd always rather go for someone that's perhaps got the boom bust potential that could easily bust, but has got a better ceiling. If you're going to give me someone like Charbonnet, who I think is, at worst a 6 out of 10, at best maybe a 7-8 out of 10, or someone like a Devon Achane, who's at worst like a 2 out of 10, but has the potential to be an 8 or 9 out of 10, I'd absolutely go for that boom bust guy, because I just think that I can find kind of running back 2 production in fantasy, and I think that I would always rather risk it for the guy that's got the potential to be a true superstar. And I think that Achane has that. I think that he's got that take it to the house every time he touches the ball ability. And I think that I'm confident that there's going to be a team in the NFL that's going to fall in love. And I think he's probably going to be an early day 2 prospect.
Yeah. And I agree that you want to shoot for upside. It's just so hard historically in NFL. I'm looking right now at touches per game, like the lowest touch per game numbers for like a top 15 type running back in fantasy. And you got your Darren Sproles did it. Duke Johnson did it on like 8 touches. David Johnson.
These are my guys, Dave.
These are my guys. I like them, but, and too, a lot of numbers people, data centric people get criticized at not being able to spot the outlier. So I understand, like, you definitely how you gain value is to hit on those. So don't get me wrong. I think it's decent to go after those players, and Achane is the type of player I want to do it on. But like, I just don't think you just don't see a lot of those players who don't necessarily make players miss purely. Like Tariq Cohen, he's a joystick. Darren Sproles could do it with speed and elusiveness. It's just tough to see. And Danny Woodhead also was more agile than he was fast. Not Danny Woodhead was fast as well, but it's just, you really got to be, it's tough to see. It's been tough. It hasn't been done before. So it's always a little bit more hesitant. Now, if we're talking beginning of the second round here, mid-second round, then okay, go for it. Like, that's definitely the spot in drafts you want to take a risk on it. But the problem is when I have to do it at the 110, 111, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference with him, isn't it? Is that whilst he's smaller and undersized, he's not that joystick. Like you said, those other guys that were, Duke Johnson, Darren Sproles, Danny Woodhead, they were all essentially satellite receiving backs that were elite in space. And as good as Achane is north-south, he's a good agile athlete, but he is not in that level of make a guy miss in space. He is more of a, I again, don't want to do the comp, but he's more of a Chris Johnson, CJ2K type runner that is a traditional running back that is undersized and fast. But I appreciate Chris Johnson was 15, 20 pounds heavier than Achane was.
It's tough, but and I think it's more of opportunity cost. You didn't have to. You spent a second round pick to get David Johnson. Austin Eckler was a 4th down to a UDFA pickup for you in Dynasty, or he was on waiver wires for a lot of players after even his rookie year. Danny Woodhead was a waiver wire pickup type. So I guess what I'm just looking is that, and Tariq Cohen was going the 3rd or 4th round. So I guess that's, and not that he's Tariq Cohen, but I'm just trying to say about those. Yeah. The level of volume we're talking about here, because volume is such a big part of the running back position. I think that's where I pause, is that it's the opportunity cost to get on Achane. But I really think he's a fun player, and I think it's exciting. It's going to add a lot of fun to rookie drafts. I can't wait to see when Achane goes in my rookie drafts, because there's going to be a lot of trash talk, a lot of fun. And if he does do well, if we do see those big plays, and what that could do in your fantasy lineup is exciting. So I don't want to be a total hater here, but I'm very aware at his cost, where I'm not necessarily as aware, like Bijan, I'm like, all right, I'm cool to be mortgaging the farm to go get him. Like even, and whereas Achane's in the type of player where the cost matters a lot more to me because of what I have to give up to get him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that we talk about it a lot with receivers in terms of that better in best ball analogy, and I'm stealing from Tom here, but I think that he's a, if you play Dynasty best ball, if you're looking at potentially some late round flyers in best ball, he's the kind of guy that could have 1 or 2 touches a week, run off for a big touchdown. He's got week winning potential any given week. It's just might not feel particularly comfortable about getting him in those lineups every day.
I have that in my notes here because I've kind of been riffing a little bit on Achane a little bit here, but it says there's no way in hell I'm going into the season with both Gibbs and Achane in the same roster, because I don't want that kind of volume concerns. But and then I said in bold, in traditional formats. So there we go, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Just while we're here, 60% of people watching these videos are not yet subscribed. If you are watching and not yet subscribed, you're missing out. Running back 5, Zach Evans. I'm gonna have my words on him later, Dave, but I don't want to spoil your riff. So Zach Evans, have you got any strong feelings, any strong thoughts?
I'm a hater. I guess call me a hater. He topped out at 15.3, his volume like 15.3 rush times per game, but then he got injured in that season for the turf toe. So then and then he had 12 rush times per game at Ole Miss the following season after transferring. Averaged 18%, or a little bit more than that, of his team's rush attempts throughout his college career, 10 receptions per season on average. And then just only 23% or so of his team's rushing touchdowns in college. So volume and production wise, he disappoints. And that's just, there's no other way to go about it. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, people want to talk. I fell into the hype of this class 2 years ago. People were like, all right, get ready for the 23 class. And I was expecting to have, and I know some players have really missed from was it 2020, 2021, where they had Dobbins, Akers, just we were loaded, and then we had wide receivers going on top of it and quarterback. This is where some of I think it's more my expectations are playing a role in for, because, Zach Evans was such a high level Devy prospect way back in the day. So his volume just disappoints. His athleticism, okay, 4.45 at 202-ish pounds, because that's a pro day number. I'm not sure if he weighed in his pro day. He's talking about he's 3 pounds heavier than Jahmyr Gibbs. Come on. Okay. So, and Gibbs is a lot faster. And then he actually has respectable agility scores at his pro day. So that's at least shows you some, for people who really get excited about that stuff. Sure, you put that in your cap. And his efficiency. So I'm not impressed with necessarily his size or athleticism. Not impressed with his volume. But then when I look at his efficiency, all right, so now I can start getting a little bit more appreciation for where he is, because has efficient per touch numbers, but that's to be expected at a lighter workload. When you're sharing the workload, you're supposed to be more efficient with your touches. 28% juke rate and 18% big run rate as a sophomore is pretty solid. And then 25% juke rate and 23% big run rate as a junior was that 23% big run rate is impressive. That is really good. So he's showing you that he has that playmaking ability, which being able to make plays in the NFL I think correlates to high value touches. It correlates to fantasy points. So, and I know efficiency is not necessarily sticky year to year, but it's a good indicator of skill. So I think over that, I'm the hater because he profiles a 1B back in a committee for me. So he's like a 40% opportunity, like an opportunity share kind of guy, which is his team's share of targets and rush attempts. And I think if a backfield plays out for him, like not a lot of competition, then there's an injury. He could have a 3 or 4 game stretch where he could put up RB1 type numbers. But that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for him to get everything to luck out, him to be extremely efficient when the opportunity does come. And that's how I think this is what the most likely scenario is. We're talking about his career. And I'm going to tend to bet against those type of players, especially when they're being talked about at the end of the first round in super flex drafts. So I'll bet against that. But and that's because I'm talking about the most likely range of outcomes, but there are some where, a team falls in love with him. He gets a lot more volume than he got in college, and he's efficient when he doesn't get hurt, and all these things, and he has more receiving ability than he showed, blah, blah, blah. Sure, that could all happen, but the likely stuff is what I described earlier, and I'm just going to bet against if that's what could be the most likely scenario.
Yeah, I couldn't have said a lot of that better myself. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I really don't like him. I came into this, as I said, I do my film first, and I sort of was watching the games, and I was thinking, yeah, he's good. He's solid. He does a lot of things okay. He's, impressive, but nothing great. And watching him, I was just like, okay, he's good at most, but there's nothing that he can really hang his hat on and be like, yes, you're amazing. Yes, you're good at this. It was just like, okay. And then I get to the numbers and I plug it into my model. And as you can see there, pre-draft model 15th percentile. Like, that's horrendous. It's, best market share, touchdown percentage. We're talking 13th percentile. Yards per team rush attempt percentile. He's 16th percentile. Best receiving market share, 28th percentile. Like, it's I can't get over this. It's awful. And then even if you were to give him early round 2 draft capital, he still doesn't come out well. Like, it's really bad. And I don't know what he is at the next level, because I think you hit the nail on the head by saying 1B back. And to me, he's not the good type of 1B back that's going to get those high value touches, because I think he's not a difference maker in the passing game. He's not the sized back that's going to get goal line work. He's going to get low value touches as a complement to a better back. And that's not really a guy that I'm investing in. If you're now telling me I've got to take him back end of the first, early second round, I'm running away. I want no part of that at that cost. I think that's really scary. And yeah, I'm probably can safely say I'm going to have 0 Zach Evans, I think, in this offseason.
Yeah, that wraps him up for me. You go stamp.
Perfect. We'll dive into our final guy, the running back 6 and ADP. A little bit more exciting, a little bit quicker. Sean Tucker, are you a believer, the man in orange, or not a fan?
No, I mean, I think it's a tale of two Sean Tuckers. I think his sophomore season was if he could come against, if you could have just stopped the tape there and let her run, I think a lot of people were more excited. And then he was a lot less efficient, a lot more struggles in his final junior season. Look, the volume is there. I'm not even I think sometimes it gets a little repetitive when we just read off stats. So yeah, he checks off the rushing volume. He has 20 and 36 receptions over his final 2 seasons. And then 58% of his team rushing touchdowns in the ACC at Syracuse in a smaller type program. I think those are all very good things. 207 pounds, I guess. I don't have his numbers from his video in anything on mine, because I just don't, I need something official, and I'm not sure. Like, I did a quick Google search before we got on here, actually, and it said I didn't have any other updates, that he didn't participate in the pro day. So I'm not going to, sure, his athleticism could be whatever the hell people want to say it is. I don't know, but, but his efficiency is what?
He's fast-ish. Yeah, okay. I think he's fast
on a personal video. Yeah, dude, you should see the videos I look like when I'm taping myself. I look fucking, whew. So, but 5.5 yards per carry and 9.7 yards per reception for his career are okay. I'm like, in the ACC, like, where I don't think they play defense, which has been told. I don't watch college football, but I've been told they don't play defense in the ACC. And then 23% juke rate is just okay. 15% big run rate as a junior is okay. And then, which is a down season, but then 27% juke rate is better. And then 18% big rate is good. So it's slightly above average efficiency. It's just, again, he's more of because of his receiving ability, he's more of just a plotter for me. So he's a plotter. That's how I kind of, he's going to get in there, and he's just going to be very volume dependent. But he's volume dependent running back. And those guys are, who knows, they could have great seasons. They could have a great high end RB2 season because they just fall into that kind of volume, or they could sit there and they could get, 6-7 touches a game, if that, depending on where they land. So just not a player I'm willing to bet on. And I understand, like, I could look really wrong for this because he does have a lot of flashes. I think people said that he fits a really certain style of running really well. And so now I'm being told that he's really landing spot specific. So that's another knock. I'll just say this because I know we're not going to talk about him, but Kendre Miller, I'd be more excited to draft Kendre Miller over Zach Evans and Sean Tucker. I don't have Kendre Miller ranked over either one, but I'm definitely targeting him over either one of them. Those players, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll read you a line from my rookie pro guide, which I think sums it up perfectly. I've said, overall as a prospect, there is a lot to like about Tucker, but a 2-down speed back has a minimum role in the NFL. If he can round out his skill set, he could be a productive back, but that's a big question mark. And I think that sums it up perfectly in that the receiving game is non-existent. I think he's got some of the worst natural hands in terms of any of the running back prospects. I don't like talking about pass protection because I think it gets overblown and it's basically pointless in terms of how players get on the field. You can always work around it. He is a negative in pass protection. He's not even a 0. He is a negative. It is appalling. I think he's quite quick, and I think that he would fit a Shanahan style outside zone scheme and could be decent as that one cut runner. But as you said, he's not tested, so I don't really know. Is it just that he's quick for the ACC, or is it that he is quick? So yeah, I like him. The pre-draft model absolutely loves him because of, he ticks a lot of the market share numbers. He did it at a young age and, yada, yada. But yeah, he's okay. He's just not exciting. And it's one of these guys that I think you summed it perfectly when you said he's not exciting to draft, quite frankly. And I think that's it.
Yeah. And just expand a little bit more on that is that when I say plotter, I'm not just saying necessarily talking about his athleticism. I'm just talking about one of those players that you're upset when they're the running back that's in. There's someone else that you're excited about. You're like, oh my God, I wish that I could get this guy the volume and the opportunity on that team. But there's this guy on there that's just getting what's there. And that's about it. I think that's the kind of player. I think he's a get what's there type of player, and which is fine. It has value, but especially after we talk about some of the playmaking that we've seen from other players in this class, I don't get quite excited. Now, that being said, from what I've heard about him as a person, how his presence on social media, I kind of really like that about him. So that it's not like I'm rooting for him to fail by any means, because I think he's a pretty fun guy to come. Like, I feel like a little bit of an underdog coming from Syracuse and what have you. I hope he does well. I hope he gets some opportunity, but that's about as excited as I can get, I think, on him, which is disappointing because after his sophomore year, there was some like, oh man, he could really, imagine if Tucker dominated again this year or had a similar type of sophomore season that he did, it repeated it. Then you could maybe move him up to the RB3 in this class or RB4 in this class. And then you're starting to get really then you're like, all right, now this is what I'm talking about here, but just slightly underwhelming, which is, I think, more of an expectation thing with me than necessarily reflection of Tucker himself.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a look at our overall rankings. I know you sort of touched on, Dave, there, a couple of guys that would be ahead of those bottom two, but how are you kind of tearing things out of these top elite options that we're seeing going in ADP?
Yeah, so it's Bijan. This sounds really weird. So the top 3 guys are all on their own separate tiers. and then it's actually, I'd probably tier Achane with Kendre Miller, and then Zach Evans and Sean Tucker I guess they would be all on the same tier too. So I think that's okay. So yeah, just one more time. Bijan his own tier, Jahmyr Gibbs his own tier, Charbonnet his own tier, and then a lot bigger tier pre-draft of the bottom 3 and a couple other players.
Okay. And then for me, yeah, it's I guess similar at the top in terms of Bijan in his own tier, Jahmyr Gibbs in his own tier. I've then got a tighter tier of 3. So I've got Achane as my RB3, but in a tier with Charbonnet and Sean Tucker. I've then got 2 tiers before we get to Zach Evans. Zach Evans is currently my RB10 in my ranks at the moment. So I guess that probably shows just how much not of a fan I am. Are there any players that you think of those 6 that we talked about, Dave, that are particularly draft capital or landing spot dependent, or are you comfortable with some of them, even if they fall perhaps into that day 3 bucket?
If Charbonnet doesn't get, if he's if he falls to day 3, I think that's going to hurt him a lot. Like, so like the concerns you talked about him, not necessarily as exciting as you would have liked to have seen. If he doesn't get the NFL draft love, that would cause me some concern too. Honestly, if Achane doesn't go day 2, he's going to drop. If Devon Achane doesn't go day 2 for me, that's a big hit, because then you're talking about a day 3 undersized player. That's a big bet to make.
It's basically a specials teamer at that point, isn't he?
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, kind of, but I would hate. I think he's better than that, so I'd hate to say that, but I don't think it's going to happen. But those are 2 guys that get me serious pause. And I guess if Zach Evans gets a lot better draft capital than I think, if Sean Tucker gets a lot better capital than I would think, then I'd have to reassess. But I really think overall, even what these grind the mocks and all these mock draft databases have, and they're optimistic on these running backs, I think a lot more are going to disappoint than we expect. If there are so many great running backs in this class, I think the NFL is smart. I think they realize the opportunity cost of it. So, I mean, Austin Eckler might get traded. One of the best running backs we have. Like, I don't think. I think
that it's a saturated market, isn't it? You know, we've seen in free agency, there's not many great landing spots left. There's not many teams that are desperate at the running back position, and we're talking about a class that's got, you know, maybe 6, 7, 8 guys that could be lead backs in the NFL. It's like, okay, why would I spend a day 2 pick when I could probably get a similar level prospect a day later and save myself 2 rounds? I do think I'm a little bit scared that we're going to see, outside of those top 2, a lot of running backs start dropping into back end of day 2 or maybe even into day 3, which is scary when it comes to kind of potential fantasy, because there's not that much invested. There's not that much, that teams are throwing into and around these guys as prospects.
I agree. That's really well said. I would co-sign everything you just said. And I will say though, because I feel like I've been a little negative here, Jahmyr Gibbs and Devon Achane, they could do really, really well in this new against these cover 2 defenses, where if they could get through, if they could break that first, if they could, catch the ball, get through that first defender in the flat and get into that open field, they could really help open up offenses or defenses for the NFL, or like for whatever team they land on. So I think that's something to look at. Maybe that you can look at these type of gadgety playmakers with speed that could really take and find some weaknesses in this high safety Tampa 2 type defenses we're seeing that really plagued overall production in the NFL last year. So maybe that's something that could be thought of, like trying to be positive, but that's something that I'm just spitballing here I just thought about when I heard you talk. So
yeah, no, that's an interesting thought. I'm going to go away and do some thinking on that, and maybe look at some stuff, see if that's an interesting idea that it certainly hasn't crossed my mind. So yeah, no, I appreciate that, and thank you ever so much for coming on, Dave. It's always amazing. I value your insight. I value your opinion so much. So it's great to have you on and talk things through. If you aren't following Dave, he is at ff_spaceman. If you don't know, he has got the best Patreon in the business. It is absolutely incredible, the stuff that he puts out, the amount of time and hours like he puts into that stuff. I could not even begin to imagine. Dave, is there anything that I've missed? Anything you're working on at the moment?
So I have some articles on these rookies are coming out for DLF in the next couple of weeks. So I'm getting back to writing, and I'm almost done my basement. So that's what I've been working on for the last year, where I'm building a podcast studio. So I'm going to have a lot, and I've invested in a new camera, some lighting. So I'm going to have some premium video content be coming out, and hopefully by the time the NFL season starts. And just the Patreon is what I'm talking about, where we're going to find the beauty of it is it's a lot of aggregated stats, where you're going to find, instead of going to 4 or 5 different sources, you're going to find it all in one spot. Most of it's free. And the things that aren't free, it takes $1 or $2 a month. And you can get, like what I used here. It took me 2 seconds or 5 seconds to look at. I clicked on a couple of clicks, and then I could see all of the top 15 running backs dating back to 2000. And I could just sort it however I wanted to. And that's, that takes you $2 and you get that. So, and I give a lot of away for free, people who support different charities. So I think that's my big takeaway here, is that if you want some data, come find me. Don't even have to pay for it. Donate to Fantasy Cares, and then I'll flip it to you for free, just for that kind of stuff. So I know as we start to ramp up It's starting to be the part of the off season where Scott Fishbowl is going to be happening. A lot of charity events are going to be happening. So get excited. The Fantasy Wildcards having a big their potathons coming up for the Mind charity. So I know they're, I don't want to start talking about other places here, but just I think, there's a lot of great analysis in this space, but let's also take it and let's and do some good with the charity work that we can do as well.
Absolutely, and we're big supporters of all of that here as well. We're supporters of the Wildcard. They are friends of the show, so absolutely endorse them as well. But if you're not on Dave's, I cannot, emphasize enough how incredible it is. It is literally my Bible during the season, and it is ever so reliable for a lot of my off-season content. It's where all of my models are based. So yeah, go and check him out. But thank you so much for coming on, Dave. It's been a blast. We'll be back very soon with some tight ends and some sleepers over the next few days. But yeah, take it easy and we'll speak soon.